I had some amazing discussions last year with some of my favorite authors like Greg Bear, Ian MacDonald, Adrian Tchaikovsky and Peter Watts, Linda Nagata, Kat Rambo, and others. I shared videos with you where I asked them what they love about science fiction, what authors they're dazzled by, publishing trends, and what they're working on next. In today's episode, I've asked some of these authors what's in the pipeline, what they're working on, and more. I asked Kat Rambo, are you working on any new projects that you can share with the audience?
Yes, I am working on usually a multiplicity of projects, and today is this moment in time is no different. I'm working on book 3 of the space opera. I have turned in book 2. I am working on the last of my fantasy quartet. That's actually been this morning, been kind of getting a little bit done on that, and that is Gods of Tibet. And I am editing an anthology with Jen Brozek, the second in our Reinvented anthology series. And this one is the Reinvented Detective. So we have just finished up copy edits, and we're about to do a really excruciating stage, which I have agreed to shoulder this time around because we're going to alternate. So I've got to do contracts next. So I got to kind of gird my loins for that.
That's great. First of all, congratulations on finishing all of those projects. What is it bittersweet to finish out a series knowing it's the last book? Is there the temptation to say I could keep going with this, or is there a sense of accomplishment and finality to it?
Well, with it, I'd like to get it off my plate because this is a series that I've written very slowly, and I've been grappling with it for like 10 years. And like, I'm ready to be done with this world for a while. And part of that is that I love the space opera so much. And those characters kind of like come and talk in my head in a way that the Tibet characters never had. So I would just as soon kind of sign on board that crew that I am super enthused about, because life is short and we only have so much time to write in. So write the good stuff.
One of my favorite time travel novellas is Steve Bellinger's The Chronicar. I had the honor to interview Steve last year and ask him about The Chronicar, as well as which of his books I should read next.
Okay, Apocalypse, the digital dystopia is coming. And what this is about a retired computer tech, sort of like me. I'm not quite retired yet, but I'm getting there. And he and his girlfriend discovers that humanity is being subtly influenced and eventually controlled by our common technology, our cell phones, our computers, virtual reality glasses that in the story end up being legally required. And I think it's different in that you don't know if it's the computer or the people controlling the computer, and it's just one of my favorites. And so I would suggest for yourself, for example, to read Time Waits for No One, because it's the actual sequel to the Chronicar. But I tell people, if you want to read the entire thing, read them in the order they were written, which is the Chronicar, Edge of Perception, Apocalypse, and Time Wait for No One. Because even though they're all different stories and they all stand alone, even Time Waits for No One can be read without reading the Chronicar. They all stand alone, but there is a connection to all of them.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. Love
it. And I did want to mention also, just for the heck of it, that in Apocalypse, there is also an Easter egg.
Okay.
And I challenge people to find it because I ain't telling.
I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yeah, well, if you figure it out, let me know and I'll tell you if you're right.
All right, and which one has the Easter egg?
Apocalypse, the digital dystopia is coming.
All right. Author of Incomplete Solutions, Wole Talabi is an incredible author who writes mostly short fiction, and I desperately want a full-length science fiction novel from him. Maybe I'm being too aggressive.
Yes. Yeah.
So when is the novel coming out?
Everybody has to ask that question. It is a good question. I mean, I do have a novel I finished writing, which I have a publisher, I have a deal, everything's all signed, just waiting for the publisher to sort out some administrative things. So possibly next year, hopefully next year. According to the original plan, it should have been out this year, but currently it should be out next year. So we shall see. And yeah, I want to start working on the second novel this month or next month. So I also have a bunch of short stories coming out. I feel like I've been writing a lot in the last 2 years, but not much of it has been published, which invariably means it's probably all going to come out in one big flood. Maybe next year is the year everything just comes out and everyone says, "Oh, Wole, you're so busy writing so much." And I'm like, well, it's been piling up.
Well, that'll be great. I'll be happy to see all of that. I can't wait for it. Space Satan? Will that be the next Adam Roberts novel? Probably not, but let's see what he has to say. I spoke to Roberts last year about his novels Beta and The Thing Itself, and I plan to read This sometime in 2023, but what's he working on next? Is there anything that you're currently working on that you can share with us?
So yeah, so I did The Thing Itself is a kind of Kant, and then I read Hegel for a different reason. So then my most recent novel, which is called This, is doing the same thing for Hegel. And then I thought, well, I'm going to have to stop writing science fiction novels that are just based on philosophers, or it'll become my brand. People will be like, I'm singing novelty singles, and people won't take me seriously. So I'm trying something else now. I'm doing a novel that's I'm about 2/3 of the way through writing it, and I think it's going to be called Lake of Darkness, and it's a utopia. It's set in a utopian world, into which we discover that. So my 14-year-old son, I described the story to him, and he said, "Oh, you should call it Space Satan with 3 exclamation marks at the end of it." And my agent agrees with him, so I don't think I will call it Space Satan. But we discover that something that might be Satan has been locked in a black hole, and is let out and to kind of run across this utopian interstellar society. It's a kind of space opera thing, I think, with flashes of kind of horror in it. But I'm trying to write it in a plainer way so that it's more direct and more accessible. And I'm interested in that. I'm not sure I've seen utopia and horror put together in the same kind of story. So I'm curious to see how that might go. I was also interested about the pressure of pushing out new work, and I asked Kat Rambo how universal, I mean, in your experience, Peter Watts is somebody who's participating in this big project that I'm doing as well, and he mentioned, he was talking about the writing experience with Starfish, because that was before all the pressure of publishing, and he could take his time with it like he couldn't with some of his even more popular work, now that there are deadlines and things like that. How universal do you think that pressure is in traditional publishing to not necessarily rush something out, but have it impact the creative flow?
Well, I don't know that it's not, I don't feel so much like it's the demand, because honestly, traditional publishing grinds so frickin' slowly. And this may just be that I write relatively quickly and prolifically, that I'm kind of like, yeah, I could throw more into that, maw if I needed to. And I probably should. But it is the sort of discouraging, trundling dance where you're like, I have given you my book, and now a year later you're coming back with some edits, or and now I'm really ready to hear those like right now. I mean, honestly, I'm like, give me those copy edits. I'd really like them, and that can be, I think, discouraging, particularly when it's a book that you really, really love, and you're just like, let's get it out.
I talked with S.A. Barnes, author of Dead Silence, and Wole Talabi about representation in science fiction literature, as well as the greater prevalence of science fiction coming from the non-Western world. Do you think that, I had all these questions to ask you, but there's so many interesting things that are coming up here that I'd love to take advantage of the conversation to ask. Do you feel like, when I look at science fiction now, and I'm the type of reader that I try to be more diverse in my reading habits. I want to read from authors that don't look like me, who are from places that I'm not from, and have those experiences. And I do read a lot of science fiction, classic and modern. I feel like right now, there's never been a better time in terms of representation with female authors of color. You have folks like, Nnedi Okorafor, Micaiah Johnson, Wole Talabi. I mean, I could go on and on. Do you think that's an accurate statement? Do you see that as well?
I think we're definitely seeing improvement. I think there's always going to be room for more. and I'm blanking, and this is terrible. There is a novella coming out, and I blurbed it for Tor, and I can't remember her name right now, and I'm so sorry. I think it's Ness or Nessa, and it was fantastic. So I really think there are definitely more opportunities. I think that only benefits us both as a society and also as readers. I think that we're a little behind everybody else in sci-fi. I think we need to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Nigerian literature has always been recognized. I mean, we've had a Nobel Prize laureate. A Nigerian won the Nobel Prize for literature, and I think that was in 1986. Like I said, you've had people winning the Booker Prize and other international prizes, but perhaps not in genre. That was the thing, because they would win literary prizes, but not genre, and maybe not recognized. So that's happening a bit more now. And I think what's happening is a lot of Nigerian authors who have always been writing these kinds of stories, or stories with these elements, are recognizing that there's a space for them in genre. And so they're identifying that way and getting themselves more recognized, and, promoting themselves on social media and making sure people know who they are. So there's more visibility, I would say. And I like it. Obviously, it's encouraging to see the interest. It's encouraging to see also other Africans as well, because Nigeria is a significant portion of Africa just by population alone, right? I think we're something like almost more than 30 to 40% of the entire continent is Nigeria. Yeah. So there's a lot of us. So just by sheer numbers alone, you will definitely get a lot of Nigerians popping up, but across the board, lots of Africans everywhere. And I like the variety of stories that we're getting because of it. Because even though you do still have what has happened in a lot of Western science fiction is, over years and years, people are drawing from the same or similar sources. So it kind of becomes a lot of almost the same, if you will, or at least it's familiar and recognizable. And what's happening is now you're getting people drawing from different storytelling traditions, from different cultures, from different philosophies. And all that is doing is it's giving us more interesting stories, or different stories that perhaps contradict or complement what we were seeing before. So again, it just goes back to what I like, which is it's that feeling of your brain expanding and understanding and seeing a new perspective, a new take, a new idea, a new way of saying the same thing, right? So all of that is, I'm really enjoying that happening. And I hope it continues. I hope it's sustainable. I hope it's not a fad. That's kind of the worry at the back of my mind, that it's like, here's the hot thing of the year, and then everyone moves on to, Iranian science fiction or Turkish or whatever becomes the next in thing. Hopefully it's not that.
I really connect with Adam Roberts' thoughts on certain segments of science fiction fandom, and I appreciate his thoughts regarding the science fiction genre featuring more diversity. Yeah, and this question might feel a little generic, but I'm curious if you have a response to it. Thinking of, I'm not going to ask you about modern authors. I understand that could turn into a list it's hard to kind of keep everybody, mention everybody. But if you had somebody come to you, maybe a student, and said, I want to get started in science fiction, are there classics that you would consider sort of, and I know maybe we're going back to the same well with Dune and Foundation and things like that, but are there maybe some lesser known classics that you feel like maybe are foundational, or that are sort of a good entry point for somebody who's new to the genre that they might not think to look at otherwise?
Oh, there are so many ways of answering that question, though. And it's one thing I'm conscious of is, as I'm quite old now, I'm in my late 50s. So the stuff I was reading when I was growing up is kind of for young people. If you're a teenager or in your 20s, this is ancient history now. And I'm also conscious that science fiction as a culture, as a group of various fandoms, has sometimes got quite cranky, almost belligerent. There have been kind of wars fought over what is proper science fiction. And it can be that older guys want this white male straight, hard science fiction, that they think that's what science fiction is, that kind of golden age Asimovian science fiction. Whereas a lot of younger people see science fiction in much more diverse terms, and much more about kind of all the kind of polymorphous possibilities of the contemporary. And that, I think, for me, I think that's really exciting. That's where we should be as a genre. I mean, there are neglected classics. There are books that I love that no one else seems to love, but sometimes that's just my kind of weird little idiosyncrasies.
Name dropping Peter Watts again, I double dipped on this topic with Waymaker Wars author Rachel Aukes. Working for a publisher and having deadlines, he's written amazing books like Blind Sight, and one of my favorite books of all time, but was not as great as he thought it could have been had he not been under a deadline.
Yes.
Where do you fall on the spectrum of when you're writing? Do you feel a pressure to get books out quickly, and does that have what level of impact does that have on the story that you want to tell?
Oh, absolutely. The market, we're in like a Netflix reading market now. It's like Netflix has turned readers into binge readers, and they want the entire series and they want it now. So regardless of, because I both self-publish and traditionally publish, and regardless, I have to get books out pretty quick anymore. Otherwise, the reader's going to forget about the series, and move on. So it does put pressure on it. You have to, I mean, it's one thing writing, but I have noticed I tend to do simpler storylines. Books tend to be a little bit shorter, more, to the point, to try to get them out faster. And I do wish I had longer time to spend on each book, but it's also in today's world that we live in too, is unless I'm a George Martin and the fans will wait more than 1 year, I have to try to make it work.
My conversation with Adam Roberts was very long, and I intend to air the full interview soon, but here's a little bit more from our exchange.
I mean, do you read a lot of fantasy, or is it just science fiction?
No, before I started doing what I'm doing, I read a little bit of fantasy, but certainly not that much. And, I feel like, in classic science fiction with Silverberg and others, and even with Dune, you get that sort of straddling the line. And then there's a lot of modern authors that I read now where you see that as well. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Nnedi Okorafor, a Nigerian author, and a lot of her stuff is very fantastical. And I don't mind. I like that. I like the imagination that goes into it. But then there's also some that like really veer over, and you're seeing things like skeletons and animated skeletons. And that sort of takes me out of the story a little bit, because I think for me, for science fiction, I like the imagining of what could be. What's that great big discovery that may be out there that's going to blow our minds, Yeah,
no, that's exactly right. And she's clearly a major contemporary writer. In fact, there's one of the things that's really exciting and interesting about science fiction at the moment is this. It's become a global discourse. It's a global culture now. And there's a huge number of really interesting, really talented writers, African writers or writers of African heritage, who are writing science fiction. And if you're drawing on an African heritage, then I think that aligns you more with a fantastical worldview. It's more hospitable to magic and enchantment. And that makes for some really interesting things. I don't know if you know Tade Thompson, for instance, who's a kind of British.
Yeah, I'm familiar, but haven't read their work yet.
Yeah, but really, really good. I mean, but also of African heritage. So he's doing fascinating things, mixing a kind of scientific sensibility with a kind of sensibility that's open to magic and myth. And Nnedi Okorafor is doing the same sorts of things, I think. And that, I think, is really interesting. And I think that's one of the strengths of science fiction, is that it is, you can remix it in all sorts of different ways. It's not just one thing. It's about a kind of hospitality to the alien, to otherness. And that's true sometimes on the level of its storytelling and the content of the story, but it's also true just as a form, as a mode. It's constantly experimenting and trying new things and putting all this stuff together.
I didn't want the conversation to end too quickly with Cat Rambo either, and I brought up Netflix and the prevalence of science fiction shows on streaming services. Do you have time for one more question that I didn't ask you previously, because it just kind of jumped in my head? I think what we've seen, and I don't know if it's pandemic related or not, but we see, with Netflix and all these streaming services, there's such a rush to try out any any new science fiction that comes along, going back to a lot of the classics and trying to mine something that could be another hit, like Game of Thrones or The Expanse. Do you see that as having an impact on science fiction literature today?
Well, yes and no. And the no part is because like series like Black Mirror and some of the other series, the kind of like serial stuff, I'm not seeing them showing very diverse authors. Like, I don't know if you've seen, like recently people have been bitching about the latest season of Black Mirror, and there's like no female authored content on it whatsoever. And so I'm kind of like, oh, I hope that doesn't influence us. But yeah, also because one of the things that's really fun about it is it's got a broader reach than books do, because sadly people are falling away from reading, and I feel like maybe we can entice some of them back if we do like some excellent TV and film writing, which there is plenty of.
Do you think that there is? I read a lot of science fiction, and I feel like diversity in my reading is very important. I try to make sure that I read authors who look different from me, that are from places that I'm not from, and I feel like there's greater representation now than ever. With folks like Nnedi Okorafor, N.K. Jemisin, a lot more wonderful female authors like yourself, Anne Leckie, who you mentioned, Martha Wells. Do you think that is maybe an accurate statement that there is being a lot more effort maybe by publishers?
There absolutely is much more effort. There absolutely is many more writers kind of being given a space. But at the same time, there's this kind of weird pushback where like a few more diverse writers gets represented by other people as like, oh my God, there's this, and like we just had, can I swear?
Oh, please, yeah.
Please
swear. Please do.
Carol Oates, right? So Joyce Carol Oates is like, oh, Whitemen are having trouble getting onto the bestseller list right now. An agent of my acquaintance tells me. That may not be how Joyce Carol Oates talks. Probably not. But I'm just like, God damn it. You can look at the list, and that's demonstrably not true. I mean, if you can look at the New York Times bestsellers list and see that it's not true, why are you saying it? That's just, and so sorry, I'm kind of head up about this one. I just annoying, right?
Yeah, that
makes sense. It's weird. Yes, we're lurching forward, but at the same time, we're getting this weird pushback that is just discouraging.
This clip with Adam Roberts speaks for itself. Would you agree with the statement that? Let me put it this way. To me, I feel like now in science fiction writing, this is the greatest time we've had in terms of the best representation of different types of authors, characters with a lot of representation of, better representation of women, obviously, versus classic science fiction, people of color, themes of gender, things like that. Would you agree with that statement that it seems to be a much more broader spectrum now in science fiction and more inclusion?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's not uncontested, and I appreciate there are science fiction fans whose tastes don't run that way. It's kind of what we were saying a little bit earlier. But for me, this is a golden age of science fiction for all the reasons you've said. And that seems to me fitting quite right, because science fiction is about encountering otherness. It's about loving the alien. It's about diversity and difference. And as I said, there are people who don't see it that way. They think science fiction is about science, and the rules of science cannot be argued with, and there's no such thing as a free lunch, and everything has to fit into this grid. And I just don't see that. That's not my take on the genre, and that's not my understanding of the world that we now live in, which is, I mean, historically speaking, this is new. We now have the capacity to travel and to interact in ways that just haven't been true for thousands of years. So we are now intermingling, and there's no turning back on that. We're now meeting people. You're not born in one village and live in that village all your life and then die. People travel all over the world. People meet and mingle with all sorts of different cultures and peoples, and that's really exciting. That diversity is beautiful, and it's strengthening and wonderful. And science fiction of all the genres is best placed to talk about that, to talk about what it means to encounter otherness and alienness, and meet and mingle with all those things.
I asked Wole Talabi, do you find yourself like seeking out the unfamiliar? So like all those similar things, you can find first contact in other places. How important is that to you in your own reading experience? Is it unique for you to find, from a different place or a different country or?
Absolutely.
Experience?
It has always been a big part of my own reading. If someone describes something as, oh, this is a really good book, I might not be that compelled to buy it. If someone describes it as a unique book, you don't need to say if it's uniquely good or uniquely bad. I'm interested. And I think that's probably a personal thing. But you asked about my personal preference. Yes, I always seek out unique, different, interesting. In my own collection, Incomplete Solutions, I describe all of my stories as experiments. I'm trying something different each time. Rather than trying to get better at doing the same thing, I'd rather try different things, different ways, different ideas, different story structure. And to me, that's where the fun is in the variety of ideas.
Yeah, and it's just amazing how the unique comes from the different experience. Yeah, going back to in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, I can't articulate how that's so different, because it's from a different cultural perspective, but I can feel it. And that's, even though this parts of the story are similar trope, it's coming from a different perspective. And that's what's so unique about it. I find it hard to watch that clip and not want to go in and immediately read several of Talabi's stories. Thank you for watching. I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read.